Hi, I'm Dr. Steve Jarboe.
Hi, I'm Dr. Pam Jarboe. Welcome to this day's version of Your Life Matters.
So for today's episode, what we're going to talk about is the brain, the human brain, and its amazingness. First, I'm just going to give you some basic geeky facts about the brain. The human brain, the human adult brain, weighs approximately 3 pounds, whereas when we're born, it weighs approximately 12 ounces. So it really increases in its size and weight. Our brain consumes 25% of our body's oxygen, as well as 25% of the nutrients that we consume. So another important reason why you want to take care of what you eat. Garbage in is going to equal garbage out. 70% of our body's glucose is absorbed by the brain. And our brain has over 100 billion neurons, and we have over 100,000 miles of blood vessels throughout our body that is all coordinated by our brain. So now that's the geeky facts. Now I'm going to talk a little bit of research about the brain. In the Journal of JMPT, Journal of Manipulative and Physical Therapeutics, Dr. Heidi Havlik-Taylor did a research study on chiropractic and how chiropractic affects the brain. And she did EEGs that studied the brain before and after a chiropractic adjustment. And the EEGs showed that the 4 major brain waves, alpha, beta, theta, and delta, were measured. And after an adjustment, the brain waves were shortened, which means that they were working more quickly and more efficiently. And so that's really important to know that our brain, if it is free of nerve interference in the nervous system, the brain can work better. Our brain controls everything in our body, so it's so important for our body to be able to work as efficiently as possible so that we can be as healthy as possible.
Yes, I wanted to add something to that, which is there's another study that was done where they did a scan of a brain. They asked a person to wiggle their toes, and then they did a scan of the brain, and then they adjusted the person. And an adjustment is a force that is very gentle, that is applied to the spine in order to remove any blockage. So sometimes your nerves get blocked, kind of like stepping on a garden hose, and it makes it harder for the brain to talk to the body. And so they actually remove that blockage, and then they scan the brain again and ask the person to wiggle their toes. And what they found was that in the first scan, when there was a blockage in the spine, what happened was a lot of areas of the brain lit up. So it was kind of like if you're trying to get your whole family out to the car and everybody's running around, but there's no organization and things aren't being done well. The second scan after the adjustment, when the blockage was removed, showed that the person actually was more efficient. So it was like a system was in place in order to only do the minimal amount of work. And it's something we hear often from patients that they're surprised about.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to speak about that a little bit?
Yes, and I also want to touch more on what you said about the subluxations or misalignments in the spine. Research studies also show not only does it affect how the brain waves function, but it also affects the arterial flow to the brain. And it shows, the research studies show that after an adjustment, there's more blood flow going to the brain. And that's obviously important because our blood brings nutrients up to the brain. Remember, our brain has 100,000 miles of blood vessels. It's like a dam. If our spine is misaligned or subluxated, it's going to impair that blood flow to the brain. And right after an adjustment, research studies show there's more blood flow going to the brain, which is going to help the brain be healthier.
Yes, that's a great point, and it actually speaks to the fact that people will often say that they feel more clear-headed.
Right. So one of the things that one of the patients asked me recently was that she felt like her brain, sometimes people say, I just feel like I have a brain fog and my brain isn't working. I can't think of words properly. And she's like, after I got adjusted, I feel so much clearer. Everything is brighter and everything is more clear. And I went over these stats very briefly. And I just said, well, that's because you have better blood flow and better synapses in the brain. The brain is firing better. Your cognitive functions are working better, meaning you can think and you can reason more logically when your brain is working at an optimal level.
Hi, and welcome to the Book Geek Moment. Today's book is called The Reality Check by Dr. Heidi Havik. And this book is all about brain, which matches the theme of our show. And in the book, it describes how the brain functions and how the brain is related, its functional abilities are related to movement in the spine. And so it's a great book. It's a little bit meaty, so it gives you a lot of research and understanding about how this works. But the really important thing that she discusses is the fact that your nervous system controls and coordinates every function in your body. And so it's so important that your nervous system be healthy. Think about it. Most people brush their teeth, they floss, they go to the dentist, but they haven't understood the fact that their nervous system might be more important even than the integrity of their teeth, because you can lose your teeth and still have a pretty good life. But when you lose your nerve system function, things go south really quickly. And so in order to have a vibrant, wonderfully lively life, it's a great idea for you to learn how to take really good care of your nerve system. And so we highly recommend this book, Reality Check by Dr. Heidi Havik.
So for this section of Chemistry Matters, what we're going to talk about is diets that are concentrated with high saturated fats. Everybody knows that high saturated fats are damaging to your heart, but what a lot of people don't know is that it's devastating to the brain as well. Research studies show with lab rats that when a rat has a diet consisting of 60% of their calories focused on saturated fats, after an 8-week period, they have gained weight. But after a 12-week period of a diet with high saturated fats, it causes the brain and the synapses in the brain, so the signals that are getting sent from the brain, to be reduced, which is not a good thing. So what also happens is that it causes an inflammation process. Now this is huge because most major diseases such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, stroke, depression, all these diseases have high levels of inflammation in the brain. So it's so important that we have a diet that is low in saturated fats. So the good news is that after 2 months of switching back to a diet in high saturated fats to low saturated fats, the mice not only lost weight, but their brains started to function at a more optimal level. So when the brain has that chronic inflammation, not only can it cause diseases, but it reduces the cognitive thinking. That's the part of the brain that does thinking and reasoning and logic. And so it's really important, if we want our brain to be functioning properly, having it fired on a normal level and also being able to think clearly, we want to have a diet that is low in saturated fats. Now, some of the good foods that you can eat, as opposed to, obviously fat takeout food, McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, things like that. A lot of foods that are high in fat are bad, but things that are good that you do want to focus on trying to eat more. Fish, which is high in omega-3s, and that improves our memory. You want to eat fruits and vegetables such as blueberries, tomatoes, and those are antioxidants. That eats all the free radicals or the bad germs in our body. And you also want to eat pumpkin seeds and zinc, which improves brain function, as well as broccoli and green leafy vegetables. These are all really, really good foods that help feed the brain as opposed to having the brain slow down. And then nuts. Nuts improve cognitive thinking and function as well. And also a really good thing to eat is beans. Beans stabilizes the brains and the glucose level that goes to our brain. Our brain absorbs 70% of the glucose in our body. So if that is getting overwhelmed, if you're eating way too much sugar, that also affects the brain and how the brain functions. So beans help to stabilize that glucose level.
Welcome to the segment where we talk about neurologically challenged brains and our children. This is something that Dr. Steve and I have been watching in the evolution of our practice. We've been practicing as chiropractors for 20 years, and I've been around chiropractic for 30 years. And we've definitely seen an increase in the number of challenges for children in our communities.
Research studies show that as high as 1 in 58 children are on the autism spectrum nowadays, whereas 10 years ago it used to be 1 in 250. So the rates are really increasing, and that's something that is really alarming to us as chiropractors.
Yeah, and just for the future of our humanity, in our communities, our children are needing extra support. Now, I just want to say that some people will say that the reason those numbers are different is because the diagnostic tools are better than they used to be, and there's a part of that that's true, but I can say that the number of children who are severely challenged, every teacher in our practice talks about it. Mm-hmm. We're all witnessing it. The number of families who are really burdened financially by trying to find answers for their kids, it's alarming. And so there's something for us to pay attention to. So in order to talk about this, we thought we would first discuss why, what are possible reasons that this is occurring? And we have read and studied at seminars many different potential causes.
One major cause or potential cause is even before the child is born, so in utero complications. So sometimes the child may be compressed in utero, or it might be a breech, which is putting adverse pressure on the neck and skull in utero.
We've also seen some moms that come into our office have had really big falls, downstairs, cement steps, just had some trauma from the time when they were carrying the baby. And so that right there, that trauma that happens to the mom, often that force gets translated into a highly sensitive nervous system in utero. So some of these problems happen in utero. Ultimately, what we want for all of our children is for them to be able to adapt to these forces, but if they can't adapt, now the nervous system gets stuck in a position that is not optimal for their brain-body connection. The second way is through birth. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Oftentimes during the birth process, even as smooth as the birth may be, it's very, very challenging on the infant's spine and nervous system. Sometimes they have to twist and pull harder than they might expect. A lot of rotation, the shoulder gets stuck, and there's potentially enough pressure on their little spines that it can affect how their brain starts to develop over the next few years. Another major cause is possible chemical onslaughts, and I talk about chemistry matters all the time on this show. So some of it may be the foods that the baby is eating, or even the foods that the mother is eating, and then nursing the child. It might not be a proper fit for the child, and it can affect them neurologically.
I just want to add a little comment to that. Is just like when I look back on my grandmother's time, the food was made locally and delivered to her. She grew most of her food in the garden, so it was like there was no such thing as organic gardening because it was all organic. That's all she did, and most of her stuff was homemade. We've moved to becoming incredibly processed. There's more processed food in the store than there is fresh food, and that's different from the way things used to be. And there may be an impact from that. We don't really know at this point in our development. Right. It's highly suspected that that's one of the problems.
The crops nowadays are sprayed with a lot of chemicals. You have pesticides, germicides, all these things being sprayed on the crops. That's why we suggest to buy organic and local whenever possible, because who knows what effect these chemicals are having on our bodies. Right. We're ingesting these chemicals that are sprayed on the foods.
And a lot of people argue, well, it's a minuscule amount, but that minuscule amount builds up over time because we're, ingesting it over and over and over and over. It's not like we're just ingesting it once. So the body has its own filtering system for these chemicals. But if the nervous system has blockages that are making it difficult, what we call subluxations in our office, that blockage makes it harder for the body to process whatever chemicals it can't process. And so now you have a slog in the system. And so nerve system interference is a big issue.
And so, talking about that onslaught, sometimes some people speculate that the vaccination schedule of how many vaccines children are getting now in one visit to the doctor as opposed to 30, 40 years ago
Right.
is so much different. There's so many more vaccinations on one visit that that chemical onslaught potentially may cause neurological issues.
Yes, this is a potential issue, is that if you look at the vaccination schedule from, let's say, when we were children to now, there is a much bigger schedule of delivery. And so in some countries, they delay the vaccination until a year old, so the child is a year old, because the nervous system is so vulnerable at those earlier years. And again, this is something that you would have to research on your own in order to learn more about, but this is some of the stuff that we have read and learned at seminars, and all of it is possible reasons why this is happening. The bigger thing is, okay, maybe it's helpful for us to understand why, because we could reduce the amount of impact that's happening on this really vulnerable, baby in utero or baby in birth. The other thing we have seen is that actual birth trauma can cause a problem. So we've seen it with children who have had vacuum extraction or forceps, but also just difficult labors. Like you want to tell the story about that child we saw many years ago? The mom was in labor, and she relayed the story about how the doctor was over her, pulling, like straddling her on the table, pulling and pulling on the baby, and when it was born, it kept flopping its head over and had difficulties breathing. And they were looking at cutting the SCM, the sternocleidomastoid muscle, in order to shorten the neck on one side. And we've actually seen that surgery with one of our nephews, which really was, we were in school at the time. It was really devastating to us because it was a very invasive surgery when our approach is so gentle, and like the amount of pressure you'd put on squeezing a tomato, and we use this pressure and this force in order to adjust. The child had a really traumatic birth, and in 4 adjustments he was back to normal, and there was no intervention. There was no helmet needed, there was no surgery needed, and he was breathing normally, and he, that child now is like 18 years old and doing great. So so a lot of really big problems can be solved in a non-invasive way. Not all of them, but some of them can be. If you look to the nervous system, it's one of the most important systems that you can clear. So these are some of the possible reasons why a person has neurological challenges, that we see in our office. And for some kids, it's a perfect storm of all of them.
Right.
And so that's a big challenge. And so what we see in the office is that these children have these subluxations and blockages. That's our specialty. There are other people who specialize about food or